I guess we'll just dive right into it. How about the easiest? Easy is not the right one. The most encompassing question: how would climate change affect Missouri winters?
The way I'm going to approach that is to talk about how trends have already changed.
Okay.
Across Missouri, and then maybe talk a little bit more about how that may continue in the same vein, because
absolutely
what's already happening in Missouri is sort of the shape of things to come in the future. In other words, I just got online, and this is open for anybody to go look at. It's something called the Climate at a Glance tool. I don't know if you've ever used that before, but Climate at a Glance is a NOAA tool. You just type in Climate at a Glance in Google, you can get there, right? It's wonderful information, and it's by state. You can even get it down to a county or a city. So we could look at Columbia, but I didn't. I looked at the whole state of Missouri, right? Just to look at trends and such. So some of the things, and I think you sort of wanted more focus on the winter, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So first of all, from a precipitation point of view, right? From our records pretty much go back to about 1895. So from 1895 to now, we're seeing something about 1/3 of an inch every decade increase in precipitation. That's not the winter. That's over a 12-month period. That's an annual increase in the amount of rain coming down. And that's per decade. That's a lot of water if you think about it over time. That's 1/3 of an inch. Okay. Since 1980, which is really sort of the ramping up period of realizing climate change, if you will, since 1980, last 40 years, in other words, we've seen a 0.8 or 80 hundredths, as opposed to 30 over the last 140 years. It's now, in the last 40, about 80 hundredths per decade increase. So we're seeing a ramping up of precipitation annually. Again, this is an annual value. Now, if we break it down into the winter, obviously winter is not the wettest season of the year in Missouri. We all know that, right? But we're still seeing increases in the winter. And my winter definition, by the way, when I say winter over and over again, I'm really going to be talking about December, January, and February. And it's actually interesting to look at each individual month as well. But for those 3 months as a whole, since 1980, we've seen about a 12 hundredths of an inch increase per decade. So it's not as steep as the whole year, but it's generally going up. Okay, if you include, so that's December, January, February. I know I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit. I also looked at November through March, those 5 months, and there's actually little change in terms of precipitation increase. All right, so overall, we're seeing a wetter Missouri. Okay, overall, that's being realized mostly in the spring and summer. All right. Winter, yes, some, but not nearly as rapid as the springtime and summer in some cases. Now, if you want to talk about temperatures, it's a little bit of a different story. Generally, they're going up all year round, but there are some what do you want to say, specifics to this, and some of them are that wintertime minimum temperatures are low. Your low temperatures in the wintertime are actually going up faster than the maximum temperatures are. So it's not as cold at night as it used to be in the wintertime. Now, you may say, well, what's the difference between 25 degrees and 20 degrees? Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we're saying. That's what we're seeing, though, is that our winter lows aren't as cold as they used to be. All right. That's a general, if you want specific values, I can give you those, but I bet you don't.
I'm sure I could find them.
Well, I have them if you
Climate
want.
at a glance.
So climate at a glance. Well, one of the more interesting things and I didn't know this until I looked it up today, is that when you look at December alone, it's warming up much faster. It's 1.1 degrees Fahrenheit, again, since 1980, per decade warmer. So in those 40 years, we've warmed up 4 degrees on it. Let's see. Yeah, average temperatures, 1.1 degrees. January has warmed up about half as much. And February, here's the weird one. And this is an interesting graphic to even look at. February is actually cooler. We've actually decreased February has decreased in temperature about 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit per decade since 1980. And if you just think about your memory and what you remember has happened over the last, I don't know, 10 years, Februarys have been brutal. They have been brutal. This year was a great example of that. But you can think back a few other years too, and we've had what seems to be a pretty mild fall. I mean, this is a really mild fall we're having now.
Yeah.
And it's a characteristic of La Nina. It really is. It's not overly surprising that it's been mild and maybe a little on the dry side. Not really, but a little bit. It's been pretty mild. And then the flip switch, there's a flip that switches sometime either in December and January, and then we tend to get really cold. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen until the end of January. And when it does, though, it seems like February and into March are quite a bit colder than normal. So those are the trends overall. So warming, wetter, low temperatures not being as low as they used to be. Yes, we can still get cold. And you probably want to ask about this year's Arctic plunge, if you will. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what you guys termed it as, or it was a
whatever the hottest term is, right?
Yeah. Well, the hottest term in my field is stratospheric warming. So we had the stratospheric warming event. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I don't even actually know exactly what that means, except jet streams got a lot weaker to our north. And when that happens, when those jet streams get weaker, it allows a lot more Arctic cold air to plunge south as far as it wants to go. And in this case, it went all the way down to Mexico, which was pretty phenomenal. Now, what's interesting about that is, first of all, that doesn't happen very often. In fact, it's extremely rare. But if you lived in North Dakota, right, and you got this, well, I know it's crazy. Nobody wants it. I shouldn't say that on the air.
No,
I don't want to say that on the air.
North Dakotans.
But I would say, if you live in North Dakota, that Arctic plunge was like, what? So what? You know, this is this happens. But what doesn't normally happen is that Arctic air that is in North Dakota moves all the way down to Texas. And now it was our 4th coldest February. Wasn't a record by any means, but I mean, we had some records in there. But for the month of February, which actually wasn't, it was cold, but not record. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Yeah. It wasn't record cold. What was I going to say? Anyway, Texas and places like Oklahoma and other places set all sorts of records, right? And had major issues. But people to the north, and I'd say probably north of Missouri, really, I hate to say it was ordinary because it was cold, but it wasn't that cold to them. All right. Yeah. This is something they would expect once or twice a year to happen. So, if you lived through it, you can kind of say, well, I lived through one of those and I probably never will again in my lifetime, because those kinds of episodes are becoming more rare as the climate changes, right? So it's harder and harder for our atmosphere to create those situations. Not say it won't, but the probability is becoming less and less and less over time.
Interesting. I talked to Judah Cohen earlier today, and he mentioned.
I'd love to hear what he said. I really would like to hear. Yeah.
He is interested in, studying how climate change is making it a little more possible to break down that stratospheric polar vortex. And it's absolutely fascinating. And when you said February was actually cooling off, that kind of piqued my eyebrow a little bit. I wonder, I don't know if there's not a link. I'm certainly far from an expert on that. But.
So there is a great debate, and this is the great thing about science, right? We can argue about stuff. We can argue about stuff and why it happens, and try to prove it. So there is a great debate in the science research community about whether, okay, the basic is this. The basics are this. The temperature difference between the pole and the equator are becoming less. I say that because the poles are warming a lot faster. Okay, so the temperatures are going up in the poles, not that they're equator warm, but the temperatures in the equator aren't warming as quickly. Okay, with climate change.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's that doing is it's making the differential in terms of temperature less, right?
Yeah.
So the greater the differential, the stronger the jet stream. Okay. Yeah. So the greater the temperature differential, the stronger the airflow, and that actually does protect us from that Arctic air a lot better. I said that a little bit earlier. When it breaks down, as I think Judah was alluding to, when those temperatures, so if the jet stream is not as strong as it used to be, it can't hold that air back. We get a more, we call it meridional flow pattern. So more like a snake. And less zonal, right?
Yeah.
And I know you know everything, but I'm still putting this in the simple terms as I can. So we go from very hard sort of zonal flow to this meridional flow, and the hypothesis is that it's because of climate change that's happening. Now there's a whole bunch of other scientists who say no, not so fast. You're correlating things that shouldn't be correlating, this, that, and the other thing. So it's an easy, to me, it's an easy explanation, and for you, and I can understand why the media folks sort of really pick up on this, because if temperatures are sort of evening out over the world, all right, then the jet stream's not going to protect us from the cold air as much in the wintertime. We're going to get more outbreaks like this. The other thing it says is once we lock into a pattern, we stay in that pattern a longer time. So once we go meridional, whatever, we sort of get a blocking pattern and we get stuck. You can't get stuck in that. So maybe it's just dumb luck that February has worked out that way. But I'm not going to say I know the answer to what Judah's alluding to. But there is debate there. It's not a settled argument yet of why or how or if that's going to happen more often.
Yeah, and I love our field because we can sit there and talk about two different ideas that kind of go against each other and not, lose our head about it.
Right. Well, some people do, but those are the big ego people.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta learn not to have too big of an ego in this world.
Man, you kind of knocked out pretty much the prime majority of any question I had, for the most part, Doug.
So what is your idea on how you're going to use this stuff? I mean, assuming that you're going to use any of it at all, how would you use the interview?
Well, the rough idea was basically just using it for some sound bites. I wasn't going to do the whole piece on it.
No. Yeah.
I'm going to try to break down the fact that we are warming up and what that could mean for Missouri winters going forward, and whether last February is a sign of something that should be expected going forward or not.
I hate to say expected, man. I would hate to say it, and I'd even hate to say more probable. In fact, like I said, I think the fact that we've lived through it means that it doesn't mean it won't happen this year, but I would say those cold air outbreaks are less likely to happen. I'm sort of making it smaller so I can send you. I'm going to send you a link to state climate summary for Missouri, and This was done a few years ago, and it's being updated now, but it's for the next National Climate Assessment. Do you know about the National Climate Assessments out
No,
there?
what's that?
Okay, well, I'll tell you to Google it, first of all. But every 4 to 5 years, we are forced, and it's a good thing, forced by Congress has a law, says we will redo or update the National Climate Assessment. We're assessing the climate every 4 or 5 years. We're just in the middle of it right now to redo that in 22, FY 22-23 time period. All right. The last one came out. You were probably still in high school. No, no, the last, I don't know. I'm kidding.
I don't know about that. That's a minute
very
ago.
young looking. But anyway, the last one came out in 2018.
Okay.
Okay. So it's been a few years, and it'll be a year or two more before the next one comes out. But they're full of great information, broken down by geography and such. But the state climate summaries are a piece of it that you can just read. It's pretty short for Missouri. You can get a good feel for what they were writing about. And I'm just going to reply back to your email here.
Okay.
But you can look up any state you want to. But this is Missouri's summary. And that gives you a nice background. And you can say NOAA said or whomever, whatever you want to say, official government document, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And this climate at a glance thing is updated all the time, every month. And if you want to, the other thing you may or may not know is we push out sort of at a continental or for the US, we push out each month the status and trends and all this other stuff for all 50 states.